Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the War Report. Now, it's been a slower news week, but nonetheless, there's still been plenty for us to talk about, and we'll start as usual in Syria. Now, the biggest news about Syria this week, which is as of today, Turkey has set up a new military base in northern Syria, and that'll loop back around. Turkey's being very brazen with a lot of its moves lately, as we will get into, because I think they're probably going to take up a bulk of the show. They have been really energized by these recent victories in Libya, and again, among other things, but I think that's probably the most emblematic event for. I would call it somewhat of a resurgence for Turkey, not only in a broad sense in terms of what they were over the past century or so, but even just in recent times when it looked like they had been humbled in Syria, it looks like they are making a comeback with that. And let me just get to this Southfront article that they had about it because it gives a little bit more information. But there's also plenty of other news in Syria we'll get into. There's been, of course, rocket attacks near Latakia and, you guessed it, Idlib, because we can never get any of that, and more Syrian intelligence officers killed. So, according to this Southfront article, Turkey has established a new base in Ras Al Ain, according to a news outlet called SOHR, which is SOHR. Now, they've been seen patrolling the town's center, and they say they want to regulate the armed aspects of the town and serve as a peacekeeping force. And this follows an earlier battle between Turkish-backed militants and between each other, because as you know, the groups have been fighting amongst each other, which has really prompted more direct Turkish intervention over the past, I don't know, 6 weeks to a month or so, because before that it looked like they were on the brink of collapse. They were going to destroy each other and pave a clear path for government forces or other pro-government forces to move in and restore order. But it looks like Turkey has taken that into their own hands after what appeared to be really them cutting their losses in Syria.
Yeah, I mean, I don't mean to interrupt. Are you done, or
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say that a lot of these bases are kind of glorified checkpoints. They're like usually one or two-story building, but I don't mean to diminish their presence because they literally have hundreds of them. So they are valuable and they are very symbolic of their overreaching power in Syria. Um, I would also mention that there was a major explosion, I believe today or yesterday, in Idlib city. Last week there was some aerial bombardments, and it wasn't certain who was behind them. People on the ground were in disagreement whether it was Russia or Syria. And as you say, Latakia, there was a major offensive by Turkish-backed forces that were repelled by the Syrian army. And yes, more intelligence officers have been eliminated in that area, that south of the Euphrates and kind of northeast of the pocket that America controls along the Iraqi border.
Yeah, right in that nexus where there's the remnant ISIS forces, Syrian
Yeah,
government forces, SDF, and American forces. So probably one of the hottest zones in Syria in terms of potential. Now, in terms of actual action, again, that goes into Idlib, which there has been more um, action around, which, I mean, that's really no surprise. But one of the more interesting stories I saw, and I want to get your take on it, is that apparently an ISIS cell in Idlib has fled from their hiding positions, are now regrouping in western Iraq. As for those of you who can see on the map, that black gun icon is where they're supposedly regrouping and starting a new caliphate they're calling the Steppe State. That's Steppe. So, like, again, I. So
this sounds like the Turkmen branch of ISIS.
it does. It does. It sounds like it
it,
does.
their,
It does sound like
their
something they
leaders,
come up with.
yeah, their leaders have heritage that goes back all the way to Timurid and Tamerlane and Genghis Khan, I'm sure.
Oh yes, the apex of Oriental civilization right there in this new caliphate. I mean, I think this is the one. It's going to take down Syria. It's going to take down Iraq. It's going to sweep through Anatolia into Europe. They will revive the great legacy of all the steppe peoples, of the Turkmen, of the Khans. I can guarantee you that these are our new overlords, and you better accept them or accept death because it's coming, and we are doomed. Now, what I love about the story is the vagueness of the details. For all we know, these people were never in Idlib and they just grouped together, aren't claiming to be survivors of Idlib just to claim credit for it to get the glory. Maybe some foreign funding because they think they're hardened fighters, but this does seem like I don't even think it's to the point where the CIA or some other intelligence agency would create this. No, I think they're probably begging for funds right now. I think this is a lot of what they're doing, but it seems even too pathetic to be a outside created force.
Yeah, and also it could be just opportunist. You do have these groups that claim to be ISIS, but sometimes they're just basically criminals, in this kind of uncertain and chaotic period that just take advantage of the lawlessness.
And they're quite
And
literally roving gangs.
yeah, they're roving gangs, and they might be this group or that group the next day, depending on the territory and where they can get sympathy. Also, ISIS doesn't. I guess ISIS no longer realizes that they're just there as a kind of spoiler force, kind of in the way that in Yemen, for instance, that they're kind of like an unofficial group that will attack the Houthis, and the same thing in Iraq and the same thing in Syria, but they don't have really the backing that they used to. Like their use is finished with, so now they're just a kind of a spoiler that can tip the balance in a fight one way or the other.
Well, I mean,
But
how
they're
how
not.
many of them do you think defected to these Turkish backed groups or any
Well,
other
yeah,
various groups? I mean,
yeah, yeah, yeah. Of course, they're getting reacquainted with some of their friends.
you fought in Al Nusra in 2017. I remember you. I you tried to
Amir,
you tried to kill me in 2018. Now we friends again.
I haven't seen you. Amir, I haven't seen you since 2017. Yeah, so that's what I kind of think it is now. Obviously, they have some areas in Syria where they've been very successful, and it's been going on for at least 2, 3 months now, at least since early May. They've given, and this is what I mean that they're a spoiler force. They're there just to drain resources. They're there to prolong the fight,
Yeah,
and
they're the
basically,
ones who've been assassinating these intelligence officials in eastern Syria. That's been almost entirely
yeah,
ISIS.
yeah, yeah. I don't know about this other group in Iraq, but they're never going to get a caliphate again. Like that's not their purpose anymore. It's over. That stage of the war has already been finished, and it wasn't all that successful, or wasn't as successful as they had hoped in Syria.
Yeah,
So
it failed the first time, so it's going to be a while before they try it again. Not that they won't, but again, it seems like they've really thrown their lot in with the Kurds, with the SDF, with the more legitimate opposition forces, as it were, to create this stalemate we're looking at right now on this map.
yeah,
And again, you know who's been quiet about all this? You know who's really been inactive in terms of Syria?
who?
Israel. It's like
Yeah,
it's as if they have their own internal problems that have distracted them on the home front. And I mean, look, we went over the West Bank annexation news last week, but it is interesting that I would assume right now would be a time Israel would be trying to project force to show their strength, maybe hitting a few Iranian-backed targets in Syria or bombing again some Hezbollah branch fighting in Idlib. I figured now would be the time, and I'm honestly a bit surprised that they're not doing these sorts of shows of force. Now, the coalition government's technically over, the emergency coalition they formed. Now, whether that will be forced into another election, whether they're going to keep this grand coalition going, I honestly have no idea. It seems like for now they are content, but looking at the past 3 election cycles in Israel over the past, 2 years. I doubt it's going to stay that way for long. So, I don't know. Just a gut feeling I have right now points to Israel making a move soon.
Yeah. So, and you would think, but I would think that it would rather be, under the radar right now, because generally speaking, all the
For they
Western
could stay
press.
under the radar of the air defense systems.
That's right. That's right. Oh no, that's right. Those passenger planes are now kind of avoiding
Yeah, there's been a
certain
there's
parts.
been a bit of a shortage of civilian flights lately. I wonder why.
Yeah, it's changing these flight routes is one of the most anti-Semitic things that have happened there. So,
Very.
but did you want to expand a little further on Israel? You wanted to.
Now I saw what could accurately be described as a stub of an article, not that much to it, that Russia and Israel had supposedly reached an agreement in terms of the West Bank situation. And I'm thinking maybe something I've said before is actually coming to fruition where Russia concedes on the West Bank, lets them take some Palestinian territory in exchange for a more free hand in Syria. And considering the fact there hasn't been any Israeli strikes since, I think, towards the beginning of the year, it's been several months, and it looks like this West Bank thing is going through, possibly that agreement is more true than I realized, if that is actually what went down, because again, that it was mostly just speculation, but I don't know, I wouldn't be surprised if that agreement was reached, and how much it'll be honored, who knows? Maybe there's a little bit of force behind it on either side. Maybe Russia finally is putting its foot down and saying we're not going to tolerate any more strikes, but we'll make this deal with you. Or maybe Israel's just cut their losses and agreed to it because they have no intention to stick their foot further in Syria than they already have. I mean, again, not that they're gonna completely pull out, but again, they might just call it a day with what they have. But I don't know. That just struck me as interesting. I figured it was worth mentioning.
Yeah, it is, and it's a rather sad news. I mean, usually Russia has always condemned them. Uh, it's a shame that they've buckled under, because the truth is, I don't think that Israel is going to honor this agreement if it is actually an agreement. And this also might be the case because something else has coincided. Iran has offered to supply Syria with air defense systems,
Hmm.
and I'm guessing that something like this agreement has actually taken place, and Iran is going to fulfill the role of supplying air defense systems. Now, I've heard all kinds of things about, well, they don't have Syria doesn't have the latest. Sometimes their systems are routinely jammed. I can imagine that would probably involve Israel and Britain and other NATO countries would probably be involved with that. We know that they've used civilian aircraft, but to me, it's very disappointing that if this is the case, that Russia has done this, because of course they lost the military aircraft with a lot of people on board, and the reason for that is because the Israeli Air Force was piggybacking behind these jets in order to confuse the Syrian military, their anti air defense systems, and continue their bombing campaign. Now, I mean, honestly, their bombing campaigns are actually really ineffective. Uh, if we're going to be honest, like they're not going to turn the tide of battle.
They're not willing to
Um,
commit the sort of forces that would be necessary to actually make a dent in terms of Syrian air defenses and air power, and just the situation in Syria in general. They're willing to take out some Iranian targets or try to assassinate a high-profile Hezbollah leader here and there, but again, Israel is not willing to commit to the sort of losses that might take place if they really want to strike a blow at Syria.
yeah,
Which I think is
yeah,
also a similar case in terms of the American policy on Syria. We're not willing to sustain the sort of losses, whether it be financial, equipment, life, and to really even just set Syria back. It's really just pinpricks at this point.
Right, and it's been hypothesized with Trump that one of the reasons why he didn't increase the number of troops, why in fact he argued for removing troops, was because it would ultimately lead to a defeat, and that would be very bad for his presidency. And in a way, Netanyahu's lack of commitment to solve the Syria problem, the kind of effort that it would take on Israel's part, really, to change things in a fundamental way, would be, first of all, it would risk a disaster like Lebanon to repeat itself. Second of all, it's a much bigger it's a much bigger field of conflict, and it's much more complex. So,
I would also say
you
that
know,
possibly it might be that tensions are higher and they're afraid a significant attack on Syria. Now, again, this is just hypothesis, it's just speculation, that a significant attack on Syria may increase pan Arab sentiments or pan Islamic sentiments and cause more violent reaction from the Palestinians.
sure, that's possible. That's possible. But I was also, I guess, alluding to that they would have to make some kind of agreement with other Islamic powers in that region
Oh,
in order
definitely.
for help in some way or another. I mean, I think the bottom line is Netanyahu goes over, drops a few missiles. Over 50% are intercepted. There's a few hits here and there, and sometimes nobody's killed, sometimes one or two people are killed. But the reason he does it basically is to garner support in Israel, right? Because he's got to appeal to his Likud base, and that's the kind of stuff that gains the support, that he's ever vigilant, because I don't know, because the the Shia crescent has to be stopped from forming.
Yeah, it is interesting. And going back just to the point I was making about the possible agreement with Russia or the potential agreement with Russia, whatever happened, it really seems like his strategy has been to really negotiate with Iran and Syria through Russia and try to get them to put a leash on it. Now, again, especially in 2018, and I think up until the plane was shot down, maybe that was a bit of a turning point. Putin, Russia, they were very acquiescent to Israeli actions in Syria. They let them get away with a lot. Now, I think after that Russian plane went down, that changed, but again, just to put that out there.
Yeah.
But I think that covers most of the Syria news we have, and now we can move on to Iranian news. So, there's been a new wave of sanctions on Iran for the usual reasons because they're trading with countries that are sanctioned, such as Venezuela, because sponsor of terrorism, all the usual things they throw at us. So, another wave of sanctions. Now, honestly, I'm surprised that there's still anything left to sanction at this point. I really don't know what the case is with that. And the development out of this is that China has outright said that they will not honor these sanctions, that they do not care that they're in place. They will continue their trade with Iran, that they will continue their ties with Iran, and actually move into continue further projects. That is as of over the past week, that has all transpired. Now, we've heard
Mhm.
this story before. Pretty much any time sanctions are announced, especially on Iran, either Russia or China, more so in case of the economic realm, China's really been seem to have been the one stepping in, saying that they don't care about these sanctions, they will not honor them, and that frankly they are worthless. And I don't know what will come of that. I don't know how much of a difference they're making in Iran, whether it's stabilizing things there, whether it's keeping their head above the water, or whether they're not making any impact at all. Now, if I had to guess, it's probably at a point where it's just keeping them stabilized enough where they can function. Because, again, the sanctions, Trump is right. They are making a heavy impact on Iran, but instead of forcing them to bend the knee, it's just pushing them further away, which if we are to believe that he's trying to play art of the deal and wants to be this deal maker and bring them to the table, meet at the UN summit, whatever other line they feed us, it's doing the exact opposite. Now, at this point, I found that after the debacle in January, a conflict with Iran probably isn't in the cards anytime soon. It seems like an unwillingness from either side to really commit to a war now. Again, we may see flare ups in Iraq, we may see flare ups in Lebanon, Syria, Yemen, all the usual proxy battlegrounds. But at this point, I really don't see what difference it makes either way, whether we reconcile ties with Iran, whether we restore the Iran deal, say Biden gets in office and does that. Now, I doubt the Iranians would be as willing to sign back onto a deal like that after that, or whether it continues under Trump with the increased campaign of maximum pressure. Really, I don't see it making an impact either way. I think we've kind of reached a status quo in the Middle East, as much as you can get a status quo in the Middle East of these blocks are drawn, these power lines are drawn. You have the Shia crescent, as it were, with tacit support from some European countries, moderate support from Russia and China, and then opposition from America and the Anglosphere and Israel and the Gulf states, whatever. I think things have kind of settled in where they are, and it would take something much bigger to really shake up this current alignment we have now.
There's only so much more they can do in terms of sanctions against Iran, anyways. The fact is that even that flex would, and it's a substantive flex. There is going to be weight behind it of Iran supplying Syria with air defense systems. So far, I haven't seen any pushback from Russia. Russia may want it, and actually, I just found an article, the Jerusalem Post, from June the 15th. So Russia is actually on the anti-annexation chorus. In fact, that's the title. Russia joins anti-annexation chorus.
Interesting. What's the date on that? Is that recent?
It's June 15th, but the vote was July 1st.
Oh, interesting. Because, yeah, continue.
Yeah, so I think it's over. Chimerica is over. Things are going to go in vastly different directions, and like you say, there is now a status quo of how things are going to go forward. And it doesn't matter which president is in. They're not going to get China by making better deals or denouncing Trump or making more concessions. The mask is off. Like, China never really had intentions to become this westernized country, and I mean that in a bad sense, of course. Hong Kong is theirs. They don't, they frankly don't care. They're going to fill it with like Han Chinese who will be happy to take over. Thank you very much, America, Britain. You can take them, all 3 million of them, and that's the way it's going to go. So I see them, making an investment in Iran. I'm seeing more commitment, not less commitment, with respect to Iran. Iran is a very, very important partner right now in the Middle East. Whether we're talking about Syria or we're talking about Yemen, it is destabilized the Middle East in its favor, and in terms of Russia and China, in their favor. And this is what I mean. They play too important of a part, and it is a counter move to America and Israel. So, in most circumstances, and yeah, so I can't see them rewinding this. It's kind of like, there were some people back in 2014 and 15 where they thought they could reimagine their relationship with Russia, and they could bring them back. That was over. Like, you can't have a coup next door and think you're going to take away Crimea. That's just not going to happen. And then you're going to reimagine the relationship. But but also you have to give Crimea back. those days are over, and in a similar way, China is not going to tolerate that. They're going to take Hong Kong, and that's it.
Yeah,
Plus,
I think
we,
people
we, we go ahead, go ahead.
I think people are coming around to the point where it is no longer a unipolar world. Now, American influence is still deeply rooted in most parts of the world, whether it be economic, military, cultural, whatever. But we're getting to a point, and I know I've made this point a million times over the course of the show, where there are powers in various regions that can not completely stop American actions, but they can stifle them. Now, I have no doubt that there will be further attempts at supporting opposition groups in Iran. For example, I think the Senate just passed some sort of resolution, or the Trump administration said some sort of resolution about MEC, which is uh, that one Sunni Marxist group that wants to take control of Iran. They were considered a terrorist group for the longest time. They have all these
Mhm.
ties to all these other places. They have like these political wings. They're a very odd organization. I'll leave it at that. But point being is, we're not going to see America just completely give up on their intentions with Iran. But at this point, I think the world has become multipolar enough where we've probably staved off another war in the Middle East for quite some time.
Right, and the truth is, China manufactures so many things that would be necessary in a war, and I'm not talking about munitions, but I'm talking, secondary items that would have to deal with medicine, for instance. That it would be very hard for America to do that. Like the whole point of, I think, total American control or full spectrum dominance that was predicted and worked toward in the late 90s required an obedient China, and a China that would overlook the past, and a China that would not, that would be content with a certain limit of its power and influence. And that didn't happen, right? So um, some of that might have been like an unconscious reaction, that they didn't want to become westernized. Some of it is resentment of the past. In any case, it didn't come to fruition, and so yeah, it would take just the most incredible war for to turn things around, and that's not going to happen. So yeah, I think there'll have to be creative ways for helping Iran. I don't know what the Europeans are going to do. We discussed last year about the name always escapes me, but it's the parallel to SWIFT, the SWIFT money transfer banking system.
Instex?
So the Instex, yeah. So they're working on that, and Switzerland is behind it. I haven't heard much news about that at all. Um, I can well imagine that America is very unhappy about that, but I would say that you know, I mean, as America becomes more stabilized, you're going to see foreign powers, kind of chip away at the periphery of American power on the global level. So I would not be surprised. We've talked last week about, you know, Germany basically saying that we need to find some other solution for, a world where America is not the dominant power. Um, I would take them at their word. I don't think these are bluffs.
Yeah, and it is interesting because a country as complicit as Germany, I doubt that Merkel's saying that with glee because, look, there may be the cold relationship between Merkel and Trump, but ultimately, the German establishment is very pro American. They want to maintain the
Hmm.
current order. Now, whether that's just because of being occupied and beaten down for 70 years, I think that's probably part of it, but also their elites also stand to gain a lot from an American dominated world order, as do plenty of elites in Europe, plenty of elites in Asia, and even some in China. And you saw this back in 2017 when there was actually an attempt to remove Xi Jinping from power by some of the old guard of the Chinese Communist Party and put in somebody who would have been more mainline, kept up Chimerica, as they put it. And I wouldn't be surprised if after Hong Kong, if after a lot of these moves that have really put China in a better position than once was. Which, I mean, it's almost remarkable that a country that was the ground zero for a pandemic that has brought economic travesty across the world and has shaken up the entire world order somehow managed to come out of it relatively unscathed. I do have to say that, and I wouldn't say that it's going to happen, but I wouldn't be surprised with the consolidation of power in China, with some of the moves they've been making externally, such with Hong Kong, with Iran, if there is a bit of cleaning house within the CCP by Xi Jinping in the coming years.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's that's going to be where things are going to go. And we'll see how that plays out. And actually, when we get to our segment in America, what we're saying now, I think, is going to make a lot more sense. It will be, I think, for people who are new to the show, something that's much more palatable. The reasoning behind it.
Now, with that out of the way, that turned into a little bit of an unexpected tangent, but Turkey, they have been very brazen, and we'll get into Libya in just a second here, but I wanted to cover this. So,
Yeah.
after their recent successes in Libya, after their recent successes in Syria, after Erdogan's really consolidation of power in the past few years, it seems like they are really taking this neo-Ottoman. I don't even want to call it a LARP because it's too substantive to be a LARP. They're really taking this neo-Ottoman path to its fullest extent. So Turkey, the Turkish Republic, which has been in place for about the past 100 years, which 2023 will be the anniversary of the official Turkish Republic under Ataturk, everything like that. It turns out they are moving away from their secular roots, and they are turning the famous Hagia Sophia into a mosque. Now, your mainstream media outlets will tell you this place was just a museum. It's just been a museum, and of course, famous cathedral was for hundreds of years. That's what it started out was until the Ottoman conquest of the Eastern Roman Empire, as I'm sure everyone in our audience would know. Turned into a mosque after that. Turned into a museum after the fall of the Ottoman Empire and establishment of the Republic of Turkey. It seems like they have moved to make it into a mosque again. And you see this on their official presence. Like if you go to their website, if you go to any contact information, they've taken it down for the museum because, again, they fully intend to reinstate it as one. Now, this has drawn the ire of many in the West, not many Western governments, mind you. In fact, uh, like even the Russian government's message about this was pretty passive, all things considered. I think, of course, Greece
Mhm.
had quite the reaction to it, which again, there's no surprise there, considering the relations in there recently over the past
Right.
5 years.
Orthodox churches have condemned it,
Oh
but
yeah, church leadership has condemned it, but like I said, a lot of the governments, even of like countries in the Balkans, like I said, even the Russian government statement was like,
yeah.
no, don't do this. Like I would have expected something much harsher, because again, this is an issue that's going to strike close to a lot of people, a lot of no surprise religious people, and honestly, it is a I maybe phrasing like this is a bit drastic, but it's a bit of a civilizational declaration of war. Now, I don't mean that they're going to take up arms tomorrow and start fighting over this, but it is saying that we are a civilizational bloc. This is ours. This is no longer a museum that honors both of them. It's ours. We conquered it. We're Turkey. We are distinct from you. We are Muslims, and we are not Westerners. And we're proud to be Turkish. We're proud to be Muslim. It's I mean, again, you can look at it as just a religious issue or a social issue, but fundamentally, I think what a lot of people overlook is it's a civilizational issue. They're again
Yeah.
they're decoupling themselves from the West on a cultural level, on a civilizational level.
Right. And this, when we look back, 20 years from now, we'll look at how this transpired just, a couple of years, maybe 3 or 4, after it was kind of obvious to the, observant reader of news and politics that Turkey was not going to be in the EU. And I think after that was obvious, I think these kinds of moves are much more easily accomplished. How The other thing too is, Erdogan now does not have a great economy going, right? So their dollar is being devalued very quickly. Even these projects, which kind of like Greece and Italy, they borrow a lot of money in foreign currency, and like this bridge that's being reconstructed, another bridge linking East and West Istanbul. Um, the hike in prices has gone up like 3 times in a couple of months. So, Erdogan, I think, is doing this obviously to gain support because he knows that they're going to go through a very troubled time, economically speaking, that further cooperation with the EU is over and has really been over for several years. But I think his stunt with like releasing tens of thousands of refugees and migrants, and now this cements where things are going to go. What he doesn't really have is a kind of senior partner in the way that other countries do. He does tacitly by the US, but it's cost the US. It's cost the US its reputation, primarily with the Kurds. So I would say they're still looking for that, and maybe they realize they'll never get it. So he's trying to forge this kind of third path, if you will. And I'm very sure he's hoping also, not just in Turkey, but he's Muslims everywhere around the world will rally behind him. Pakistan, for instance, maybe some segments of Libya, for instance. I know it's complicated. I know that there's a war between within these countries over, say, the Muslim Brotherhood and stuff, but I do think that's what he's working towards. And I know he's besieged by all kinds of issues at home and so on and so forth. But the fact of the matter is, like, it's an ace up his sleeve, and really, there's very little that anybody can do to stop him, right? You could even say the coup attempt kind of cemented where he would go with this. So yeah, on a civilizational level, Turkey, Europe, and America are drifting apart. And uh, so I guess none of us, I mean, I was very, very disappointed. I was very sad to hear this, but in my heart, I knew that this would happen.
Oh, yeah, I knew it was inevitable with the direction Turkey was going, and again, you're not going to get the kind of outrage you would get even just from continental Europe, even some of the more secular countries, just based on their history, on their religious traditions. Like, for example, I don't know what the opinion on the ground is in France, but I imagine even somebody in France is probably more outraged about this than somebody in the Anglosphere, say, because again, what connection do they have? Why do they care about some church that they don't belong to? That none of their family belongs to. They've never even met somebody who is part of this religious tradition. And again, the conflict doesn't hit that same civilizational level or that same cultural level in the Anglosphere that would, like I said, even in continental Europe, but especially in Eastern Europe, in the Orthodox countries, in Russia, in Greece, wherever. So again, I don't expect any condemnation from the United States government or especially not the British. I mean, let's not get into Boris Johnson's heritage there, but I believe we've touched on that.
Yeah.
We've touched on that one before, but now the UN wags its fingers for touching a UNESCO heritage site because that's all the UN can. That's what the UN does nowadays. So it's not really a surprise with that, but yeah, Turkey is forging its own path, and people cried neo-Ottomanism ever since the 2016 coup, ever since Erdogan came to power with more conservative religious platform, with more conservative religious base. But I do think with his moves abroad in Syria, in Libya, and with the direction he's taking Turkey, and with this most recent move, I don't think it's an overreaction to call it neo-Ottomanism anymore.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I even heard that being batted around before the coup. I heard it in 2015. My roommate at the time, actually, she mentioned it, and I mean, I was already aware of it. I'd already heard the term, but in a way, it kind of like spread to say more the normie realm. Yeah, that's been batted around, and he's the representative of Turanism in the 21st century, and what a fool! Russia is Turanism.
Of course. I don't know. Do you think he'll move the
So,
capital?
hmm, that's a good question.
Because it seems like the next logical move.
I don't see it happening. I don't think there's the base. I think Istanbul is too secular. It's
Yeah,
too
and
Western.
also I
It's too
just think
it's too paused. It's too gay. Like they have. I mean, I don't know what they have now, but they had their lesbian protests, and that are conveniently go under the name of like women's rights protests or whatever. But
yeah,
like
yeah. I
they're
also
but
just think
it's
logistically they wouldn't do it because the cost. Like, why uproot the entire thing just for that?
yeah, yeah. That doesn't mean they'll never do it. Of course, the populations from the various regions in eastern Turkey keep going there.
Yeah,
So, maybe one day it'll happen.
I mean, there's the lose lose. It's like this great historic city is either going to be full of westernized, secularized liberals or a bunch of conservative Muslims. And at this point, I'm starting to think maybe the conservative Muslims will respect us more.
Yes.
Like, okay, yeah, we have to pay the jizya, but it's better than whatever's going on now. Better than these lesbian demonstrations. But I digress on that point. But I mean, that's the thing, isn't it? I could see them moving the capital at some point down the road. I think there'd have to be a cleaning of house. I do think they'd have to do this sort of migration pattern they've been doing again, which Erdogan's been famous for. He's turned a lot of these urban areas more conservative by bringing these rural, more Asiatic, more Turkic populations into the parts where, funny enough, there's actually more who would be technically considered European now, fully culturally Turkish or culturally liberal at this point.
Hmm.
But
Hmm.
yeah, he's bringing more of the actual Turkish population into Western Anatolia, and I am curious to see how that works out. And one other thing I think we might get is if Erdogan really starts going down this conservative neo-Ottoman path, which I mean he is, but if he takes it to its fullest extent, I expect we get a lot more Turkish diaspora of the liberal kind, of the upper class kind, and look beyond the economic migrants, the people sending money home. You may see a return to Turkey from quite a few now, and not entirely. Now, again, like I said, economics is a big factor in that. Making money in Germany, making money in whatever European country is definitely an incentive to stay. But we may also get more of these westernized, liberalized, highly educated urbanites from Istanbul. I had to prepare myself to say that one. And these other urban areas coming to the west and being another uh, I would say wedge diaspora group talking about the problem in their home country and how we have to stand up for liberalism in Turkey and expect like an American Turkish lobbying committee soon, similar to what some of these other groups have. Like I wouldn't go as far as the Cuban exiles because again they've had a lot of influence in terms of influencing American policy towards Cuba, but I wouldn't be surprised if we start to see groups like that crop up in the next few years in the West.
Right, and they'll probably be moving to the latest Cantonese neighborhood, Little Hong Kong.
Oh yeah, I can't wait to see the turf wars there. We already see the Kurds facing off against the Hispanic gangs in California, so Again, good times to be had by all.
It's going to get spicy. But I think, I think what Erdogan, I think, is trying to um, basically figure out a way to make his country an economic power within the region. Like we know about these pipelines that are just off the shore of Israel and they go westward towards Italy, um, in between Libya and Sicily, Italy. Uh, he's trying to cash in on that, right? Like, despite all the talk about, everybody knows the whole, the green movement or whatever, it's not going to take off. Like people, like I understand the impact it's having on the environment, but like no one is going to quit it, right? No country is just going to uh, give up their technology because they'll be run over.
Yeah, and unless
Well,
like
one way or another, they'll be run over, and everybody knows it's not going to happen. Plus, we have the problems of, how are we going to use, say, the industrial era and fossil fuels as a piggyback to something else? So far, it's not there, except for, let's say, nuclear energy. It's we don't have it.
yeah, unless there's some sort of major collapse in the energy market, spurred on by some revolutionary technology, which again, I mean that's the story of human history. We do things until they work, until some new better way comes along, and who knows what's down the pipe for the next 5, 10 years. But point being is, it looks like with the current energy markets, with the way things are structured, yeah, they're going to be able to turn themselves into economic powerhouse using energy, more so being a transit for pipelines, controlling that, and again,
Mhm.
that's probably why they're trying to assert their foot in countries like Libya, and we're seeing gradually Iraq, of course, Syria, where yeah, they may be the origin, they may be the energy producers, but if they're under the thumb of Turkey and Turkey has the pipelines, who controls the energy?
Right. Right.
Which
So they can become kind of like a hub for the Balkans in the same way that Germany acts as a hub for Europe.
yeah, and
Um, but I'm very sure his strategists are thinking long term. What does Turkey have to do? I think the decision for EU integration, that was already off the table a long time ago, and so they have to forge this path. And I think that's also what led to them, at times, being surprisingly cooperative with Russia, but not giving in completely. Uh, but they were a part of that chorus, of course, that just wanted to see Syria turned into Libya, but he has managed.
yeah, and the last point I'll make on this is keep your eyes open for the next few years. I have a feeling we're probably going to see Turkey and Saudi Arabia go head to head. Things haven't ever really been that good between them, but now that Turkey's trying to assert itself in the energy market, trying to assert itself as a regional power, I doubt things are going to stay as calm between those two countries as it previously was. And that will be an interesting dynamic in terms of American strategy in the region when two of its biggest allied countries are at odds with each other. Now, that's nothing we're not used to. We've dealt with Israel and several Arab states, but I think this will be on a whole new level if we see any major uh, diplomatic fallout between Turkey and Saudi Arabia.
You know what? It's possible. Honestly, I hesitate to guess because I know they're at odds right now. I don't know what. I think that these next 5 years are going to be crucial, and it could be something that happens, 1,000 miles away, and that's going to rearrange all kinds of friend and foe distinctions.
Definitely. Now, with that said, I suppose we can get on to Libya before we get into some of this other news that we have. So we will pull up that right there. And even further, the GNA pushes into LNA territory. And again, that is in large part thanks to Turkish weapons shipments to the forces they've deployed to the effort they put into Libya. And the conclusion I'm starting to come to now is not that the LNA was this great force that just overpowered the GNA. I'm starting to think that, I don't know, Haftar may be a weaker leader than I originally thought, because a lot of the success they had, I'm starting to come to the conclusion that it was just due to disorganization, disunity within the GNA, within the Tripoli based government. And now
Mhm.
that Turkey is there, sending their advisors, sending their troops, and that they have somebody really more competent calling the shots, that they're actually making progress. Now, I don't think they're going to sweep across the entirety of Libya, but they've made a lot more progress than I would have expected them to make, say, this time 3 months ago. But lo and behold, I think now that they have at least semi decent leadership, even if it's from the outside, we're starting to see the weaknesses of the LNA, of Haftar's government, even with the Russian support, even with the Egyptian support, even with the French support, and even with some of the Gulf state supports. That I see, in order to counter this, one of those countries or a combination of so will have to send not their troops, maybe just advisors, maybe more weapons, which that will be interesting because again the GNA is the UN backed government, so you can get away with sending them more weapons and arms shipments than you can to this unrecognized government that is probably considered a terrorist organization by many countries around the world. And I know the United States is not on a good footing with the LNA either. They were supporting the GNA for the longest time. And you even see with the tribesmen and these other militias in southern Libya, they're even pushing into LNA territory. Right here, you can see on the map near the oil fields, they're pushing northward.
Yeah, I saw that, and there were some anti-air defense systems that were knocked out by the LNA, and Turkey seemed to have replaced them very quickly within 48 hours. And I noticed on the heels of these missile silos being taken out that the LNA proposed a peace deal. Now, that doesn't sound really good. You just knocked out like their ability to knock out your jets. You have a free hand. I don't know what the rules are. I mean, you notice, Turkish jets aren't bombing Damascus because there's some agreements that they've made. Um, so I don't know what kind of an agreement there is between the LNA and GNA. Um, I didn't see much of an agreement, but I could be wrong. So in any case, they asked for a peace deal, thinking that they had hit a blow, and that's what it was going to take in order for the GNA to agree to a ceasefire or to a peace deal. Well, that doesn't sound like you have a lot of energy left going forward. So now Egypt has been posturing. They've conducted another set of military drills on the border of Libya. They definitely don't want any kind of rise of the GNA. They definitely don't want the country, especially, I guess, its oil fields being taken over by the GNA, which Russia currently is guarding. This is just so crazy. So, yes, to me, it appears that the GNA has got the upper hand again, if we compare it from last week and the week before. I don't see them maybe having an all-out victory, not yet. And it depends on the will of these other partners, which, you remember in 2015, Saudi Arabia was going to invade. They had amassed an army of 200,000 soldiers on the border of Syria. Remember all that talk? And like literally nothing happened. Russia just went on bombing. So, I don't know if it's just talk this time. Because you could say, well, it's a consensus. Well, there was a consensus back then as well. So it's hard to tell. A lot of this depends on which country seems to be having the momentum, because it's a fallout. Like, we live in a different time. We live in a different age where, like, we have gigantic refugee camps. We don't want to, just let nature take care of everything. Where these people, like, in the tens of thousands literally starve to death, right? There's all kinds of international agreements. There's all kinds of avenues and techniques of bringing pain, like sanctions, to a country. Um, so all of that apparatus is in place, and it's we're not fighting wars with like total victory the way we did, say, maybe up until the First World War. Not that there weren't agreements then. I understand that. I recognize that. I'm saying there's a certain kind of brutality that state actors cannot really engage in without severe consequences down the road. That's what I'm getting at. And that's primarily because of an international body that can be, whipped into a consensus very quickly if it has to be.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And the UN, as toothless as it may seem, when it comes to certain things, and even in the case of Libya, it's not as toothless as you might think. And I think we're seeing that
Mm-hmm.
play out right now. And I think the biggest thing that hinges right now, the deciding factor of this conflict, will be Egypt. What will Egypt do? What is Sisi's next move? Will he stage a military intervention like he was threatening a few weeks ago?
Mm-hmm.
It wouldn't surprise me, especially seeing how much Muslim Brotherhood influence is in the GNA, that he wouldn't want that. Not to mention that Turkey and Egypt aren't on good terms as it is, so not only would you have a Muslim Brotherhood backed government, or at least partially Muslim Brotherhood backed government, but you'd also have a Turkish allied government as a neighbor, a country you are not on good terms with. I do think what you're looking at there is, if Egypt does not intervene within these next few months, I do think it will be something of a GNA victory. Again, will it be a total victory? Will it be a diplomatic victory? It'll probably be a diplomatic victory where they get a seat at the table, and it's a shaky peace with a uh, technically coalition government, probably under a strongman. But point being is, I do think we're approaching a now or never moment for the LNA and for the
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
leadership in Egypt in particular. That if they don't take action now, all the work they put into Libya is going to be for nothing.
Yes. Um, yeah. I mean, that's what it comes down to. Uh, Now, I don't know what kind of pressure America can exert on Saudi Arabia, and on Egypt for that matter, because, well, Egypt, I think after Israel, receives the most amount of aid. I know this was true about 10 years ago, 8 years ago. So I'm very sure that they're in the top three. If America doesn't like them bombing the LNA, I mean, the GNA, those screws can be tightened. And so unless there's a kind of a consensus and a creative way of going around that, or like, in other words, another system it could only happen if the world was less unipolar, right? If there was actually more multipolarity, this could, Egypt could do it. It could act on it. I could be wrong. Like you say, they could act. It might happen. It might happen this week that they'll invest maybe like a squadron of jets that'll blow up a few places, disengage, and it'll be enough for maintaining the stalemate. But the truth is these stalemates are all over, from Ukraine down to North Africa. You know, all these unresolved stalemates, and they can't go on indefinitely. I just wonder what is their lifespan. Like, you could say the war in Libya has been going on now for 9 years. It's never ceased. There was always some kind of violence, some kind of um, terrorist action, and we're not talking about a small group wreaking havoc. We're talking about large swaths of land that uh, flowed from one group of hands to
I
another
mean, ISIS established a slave
violently.
trade that is now ongoing in
Yeah,
the hands of other groups. So that should give you an idea of what we're looking at.
yeah.
So it is, again, we are in the, I would say the 2010s was the decade of stalemates, and I think that will continue into this decade because even if there's a shaky political solution, how long is that going to last? How long until some ambitious general doesn't try to establish a centralized rule over the country, like again Libya had under Gaddafi, under their monarchy before Gaddafi, and what we're looking at is again, there's no solution in sight beyond this country staying fractured. Now, again, the question is it going to be fractured where there is armed and open conflict, or is it going to be fractured where there's street violence? I think that's really the two options we're looking at now.
Yeah,
But I think
yeah,
that
good point.
I think that covers all of what we had to say for Libya. So I suppose you want to get into Ghislaine Maxwell or some domestic news. Now, it's your call.
Uh, well, why don't we lead with Maxwell? I'll be honest with you. I've only looked at articles on her askance, so I haven't really read too much about it, or listened to too much about her case and so on.
Well,
Uh,
it's still relatively new, so we're
you
getting
know, my own
details as they come out.
conclusion, like many other people, is that I mean, it's a cleanup operation, right? Like,
Yeah,
basically, the point is to protect her, to not allow her to get killed. I mean, suicided, the way Epstein got suicided, and I think leave it at that, because I think we know these honeypots, and we know how they're tied up with American and Israeli intelligence, and we know their purpose, right? And you know, they're not going to just allow uh, these names to be published and the prosecutions to go on indefinitely, because unironically they would go almost indefinitely if you had to round up all the people involved in this.
as a wise man once said, maybe this is why Stalin had to waste so many people. Now, who said that? I don't know. Possibly somebody here, but point being, but it would have to be on the level of Stalin's purges if you really wanted to get rid of everyone on the Epstein list. If you wanted to hold them all to account, it would have to be on that level, show trials and all. And at this point, you know what? Doesn't sound too bad, but I digress on that point. But again, I tend to agree with you. This Maxwell thing, it's a dog and pony show. It's to make sure she's under watchful observation. If they don't need her anymore, she will. She'll succumb to COVID-19 or decide to just tragically take her own life in her jail cell without any sheets. You know, stuff like that. Something like that will happen if they deem it necessary. But what we're
She's
looking at,
wearing paper clothes right now, just so she doesn't get ahead of her suicide, or she.
hey, look, those paper cuts, man.
Yeah, yeah.
They can wreak havoc. But again, as I'm sure you all know, Ghislaine Maxwell, however the hell you pronounce it, was Epstein's mistress, was his quite literally his partner in crime, and daughter of famous Mossad agent Robert Maxwell, who died mysteriously in 2008 by falling off his yacht. 2008, also coincidentally the same year, Epstein got his sweetheart deal, as they call it. So, I don't know. If you want to connect the dots there, it's up to you.
Yeah.
Draw your own conclusions is all I'll say. But again, a lot of people are acting like she was just some tag along mistress to this um, billionaire child sex trafficker. Now, if you want my opinion, I think she was probably the leader of the operation. I think Epstein was the face. I think he was supposed to be the fall guy until certain things happened that I'm sure you all know what I'm talking about. And that she was the one with the intelligence ties who ran the honeypots, who did a lot of similar work with her father when he was a Mossad agent, again, before his mysterious death, as some may call it. But what you have with all that is, I think she was really the operational manager behind all of this. And I don't think we're gonna get anything of this. I see the resist hard saying, "Oh well, Epstein and Trump. It's clear what's happening." A lot of the Q people are like, "Oh, Hillary Clinton's finally going to jail, guys. Believe me, it's this time."
Oh yeah.
And we just gotta yeah www.ga.com or whatever the hell they post. But point being is, again, this it's like the Epstein thing all over again. They're going to do the partisan thing. They're going to do like, oh, they're going to get all of my political enemies. But at the end of the day, again, these are just loose ends they're tying up from a successful operation. Let's just leave it at that.
Yes, yes. All that needed to be happen has happened. It's all about him being a pedophile and nothing to do with Israeli and American intelligence and honeypots and all the rest of it. Mission accomplished, basically. Like
Oh,
there's no
absolutely.
point.
Yeah, I
Like
mean,
if you want to go after Prince Andrew, well, that's just animus towards the royal family. So it'll stay right there. It's not going to move forward. I really don't believe that anything will happen to him. And according to the date that she was captured, the news briefing that was given by the lawyers prosecuting her was that actually she was involved in some of these sexual abuse cases firsthand. She wasn't just somebody who oversaw it and just let the men have like it's far worse than that.
she
So
wasn't just a curator of underage girls.
yeah,
We'll put it at that. Who,
yes,
oddly, all seem to be white. Nothing weird about that. That weird temple. No sinister intentions to this. It was
yeah,
just it was just rich people abusing their power. I mean, admittedly it was, but again, if you believe that, that's an extremely reductionist view. If you want to downplay the occultic elements on that island, if you want to downplay the ties to several intelligence agencies, chief among them being the Mossad, look, be my guest, but you're wrong.
yeah, yeah,
So, with that brief segment out of the way, that didn't take as long as I thought. Uh, I hear that Oklahoma is now free range for warlords. Yeah, Eastern Oklahoma
yes,
is now. Uh, the decision of the case was it had to do with the prosecution of a Native American man on tribal grounds, but then they dug up this treaty from the 1800s saying, well, this is technically tribal lands. And the way tribal lands work is they don't fall under the jurisdiction of local or state governments, but the federal government can step in and investigate and prosecute cases on federal lands. But mostly it goes to the tribal courts, which again adhere to what's left of the traditions of each tribe. Now, I've seen some lawyers say, I've seen some people with a bit more insight on the subject saying, yeah, this is toothless. It's really just sort of a case to say we care about minorities, whatever. And again, I can't say how this is going to turn out. I can't say that this really is going to turn half of Oklahoma into a tribal reservation. But even if it isn't, even if it's just, again, a sort of symbolic thing, sort of a toothless thing, I do think it's very symbolic of where things are going and where things have already gone.
yeah. Imagine that it happens just after CHOP is dismantled. You know, this is, I think, going to really resonate, and it's, I think, the future of things to come. Um, it's almost like balkanization is just starting to happen. Uh, I don't mean to be flippant about it, but I think other native groups are going to find treaties as well. I think that's obvious now. In the same way that statues that were toppled about 3-4 years ago, we've seen like an acceleration of over 117 in just the last few weeks. It's just going to keep going this way. Now, you know, you're at a moment, say for instance, where if you're one of these groups, you can't really get everything that you want, but there is a kind of gradualism that can be applied. And what you're really seeing is just the ineffectiveness of Trump's presidency. They can't really do anything about it, and all these things that were impossible, improbable, right, now suddenly are. And
I mean,
it,
his big
I think
hardline
one of
conservative
his
justice supported this decision and actually wrote the majority opinion. Keep that in mind.
that's right. That's exactly what I'm saying. So it doesn't matter. the Supreme Court in a country that is a proclamation country that has a constitution. It's the judges that are ultimately going to have the most amount of power. It may not start out that way, but it will evolve that way, because you know a legal item like that will always have to be revisited over and over and over and over again. That's just the nature of it. That's what a constitution is. And so, that's the priesthood of America. So his appointees didn't make any difference. All that belly aching by the Democrats, how fascist regime was going to be, like all of those ridiculous ideas. Now, of course, they're completely quiet about them. And so, yeah, I think this is going to set a precedent. And, it may be, in 2020, 2022, maybe, these groups won't have a lot of power. But as things become more and more untangled, I predict they will. And there'll just be certain areas that will, I think, become lawless, where patrolling them there won't even be the legal right for them. Now, you mentioned the Fed, they could do it, but I think they're hesitant to do it. And if this accelerates, the Fed will not be able to keep up. Its resources will be stretched. So there'll have to be a give somewhere, I don't know if the FBI has an incredible entrapment program going on where they get autistic and like half crazy kids, mostly young men, to go along and do stupid things. But are they going to scrap that? I doubt it. Are they going to hire more agents? Well, maybe they'll have to. But I don't see that changing the tide.
They're going to dismantle these police departments. These people are going to be out of work and looking for jobs. They can go be half-baked feds with the best of them.
Yeah.
I mean, at this point, honestly, they might actually do a better job. I mean, that's not saying much, but it's something, okay? But
Yeah. I mean, there's even threats of like releasing over 1,000 inmates. Like, I mean, we already saw that certain inmates that weren't considered violent were released and so on, but some of them did go on to commit acts of violence. So yeah, you're just seeing this like greater amount of lawlessness taking place in the country and greater polarization. This will just polarize the population even more, and it will be another victory for the left. That's no question.
absolutely, and like I said, even if this does turn out to be a toothless thing, symbolically it means a lot, and I do think with the direction we're going, a lot of local law enforcement, a lot of state law enforcement are just not going to touch these things. They're going to think, I have better things to do. This isn't going to end well for me or for my career. I got to watch my own back. Sorry, but you're on your own. And then again, the feds won't pick it up. They'll be too busy trying to to dismantle people trying to spell out certain words on various websites. But point being is, yeah, again, they're going to do these entrapment things. They're going to go after the far right, after neo Nazis or whatever, all these clan groups that they already control, but whatever. And again, you're going to get a lot of it where certain people can get away with crime because nobody wants to deal with the headache of touching the issue.
Yeah, the will isn't there. There's simply no will to counteract this. It just doesn't exist.
But
And I suppose we should. No, finish up. I didn't mean to interrupt.
all I'm going to say is, if there's any aspiring warlords out there, Oklahoma might be the place for you. So,
Ransom
so,
shows
so,
up.
so long as you can claim tribal citizenship, it is all yours. And I'm sure there's at least one of you out there.
Yeah, yeah, and but this also today, of course, there was an article I read about how, and again, this sort of bolsters up what we've been saying for a few weeks now about a soft coup. happening in the U.S. So just days after Trump made his Rushmore speech, the U.S. Army has come out and said that actually Mount Rushmore is a symbol of white supremacy. I mean, it's over, right? It's the same thing as Mattis and all the other generals like Milley and Powell denouncing Trump after the first or second week of the protests when he was debating using the National Guard. And that's the whole point of it, right? Is to say that actually he's not the leader. He's not. Just watch what we'll do. And it's really quite something extraordinary to behold. I've never ever seen a presidency like this ever, and it will go down in history as the presidency that kind of lifted the mask about how American power actually functions. Because you could argue it wasn't clear before, but now it is, and it doesn't matter whether Trump. Yes. So now that the mask is slipped, we're seeing how American power actually functions. We're seeing basically what Mulbug was talking about: blue and red empire, and blue empire is going to completely gobble up red empire. Now it'll still need it, but it'll need it to change dramatically based on where blue empire wants to go. And so yes, symbolic power is actually really important, and it is actually powerful, really effective here as it manifests in the physical realm. And yeah, there's no pushback. There's no will to push back against this. And part of that may be that there are threats. We only see the surface of these perhaps inner struggles, or perhaps they're just orchestrated to appear that way. It doesn't matter whether Trump was our guy or not, because he had to, he fulfills this kind of symbolic role, and it angered, 52% of the population of the U.S., and they've lost their minds, and now the whole country has to be completely revamped. Now, I do believe that he spurred this, that all of this was supposed to happen far more gradually, but I think they, they played a gambit, with Corona and with George Floyd. And I think the windfall that they received has even surprised them. And it's why both the generals can do this. It's why the Supreme Court can fold. It's why the U.S. Army just, what was it, like 5 days after Trump's speech, can say that Rushmore is a symbol of white supremacy.
Yeah, as you said, I think Trump has made the mask slip, and for better and for worse, because I do think it forced them to overplay their hand a lot and possibly, I wouldn't say woke up a lot of people, but it it shocked enough people to get to the point where they realized, hey, what's really going on? So, again, for all the criticisms I have of Trump, one thing I can give him praise for is the fact that he was the catalyst for them to make these very blatant, overt moves. And I don't know. What do you think, American Gorbachev? You think that's a fair? You think that's a fair title at this point?
Uh, yeah, kind of like but he's not even attempting that. He's still going on talking as if he has control of the country. And that's what's so sad about it, is that he hasn't even accepted that he's lost, right? If he were reelected, it would be the same phenomenon. He would have to admit that he lost. Um, it's caught a lot of people off guard, and I have to hand it to them. They sussed out the population really well about how they would react. But there are going to be consequences for this. What is happening with the demolishment of all these statues, and we discussed last week, much of it now is really whether they're Western or not who the statue is there to represent, because they've knocked down abolitionist statues. Um, the whole point is that when a civilization sees their like their symbols destroyed like this, they don't recover. They Egypt is a prime example of this. Yeah, when Akhenaten got rid of the funerary rites and debilitated or constrained that priesthood, you know, um, eventually he was overcome, and the priesthood reinstated the funerary rites. But Egypt never fully recovered after that, and never built pyramids after that. And so, right or wrong, all these symbols, whether people agree with them or disagree with them, carry on another kind of symbolic power. And that is about, an identity, and that does inform the will of a people. So, what's ahead? What are they going to be replaced with? Um, this is going to be, I think, eventually it's going to be very catastrophic because they don't even have anything to offer. There isn't even a statue that they could put in place. And yes, yeah, I know. Um, uh, they'll just put up a statue of Lenin. Like, I get it, but they're not going to put up, you know, 50 statues of Lenin next week. It's not going to happen. There might be like a rare, shit lib city that's going to do that, but most Americans don't even know who he is or what that even represents. And besides, America is still very much a capitalist country. So, and these you know communist larpers are just they're not, they're essentially liberals. I mean,
Yeah, I like to call them red
they're well funded
liberals.
by corporations. What's that?
I like to call them red liberals.
Yeah, yeah. So, there are going to be major consequences as a result of this.
Yeah, and again, I see them putting up statues to these obscure, like you see this, they do this every once in a while. Look at all these things that were actually invented by black people, and it turns out that there was one black person involved in the creation of this one thing, and it's going to be a bunch of statues of obscure people like that, where they rewrite history, saying, like, oh, George Washington Carver, he invented peanut butter. We need a statue of him. It's going to be a bunch of stuff like that, and it's going to be
Mhm.
very, as you touched on in our last episode, very grotesque depictions of these sort of people because they can't have anything that resembles Western art, European art, the
Yeah.
art of European descendants. So it can't be visually pleasing. No, we can't have any of that. I mean, you've already seen the sort of artwork they come out with. It's just going to be a bunch of that if they even put up anything in its place. That's the big question. Will they even bother replacing it? And as you were getting at, I honestly don't think at this point they will. I think they will just leave us with a quite literally a blank slate society that they always managed. A society of amorphous blobs who are nothing more than consumers. What they've always dreamed of.
Right. I mean, at best, I mean, somewhere they're going to put up like um, female characters from the latest Star Wars series. I can imagine that.
Yeah, black lesbian heroes of literature, as it were. um, just the most absurd combinations you can think of, no less. And these will be our new gods. These will be who we pay our tribute and respect to, while they continue to plunder us, just the normal, average, everyday people. And while countries halfway across the world are building monuments to their own history, and I mean, it's amazing that this has stayed relatively contained to the United States. Now, yes, you had the Black Lives Matter protests all across Europe, all across the world. Yes, you've had the toppling of a few statues in the UK, and again, they got that one Napoleon Bonaparte statue in France. But it seems like it's been a relatively contained phenomenon yet, and I don't know whether they think it's just time for our final blow, whether they think they've demoralized Western Europe and other parts of the world enough to the point where they don't have to do this, or whether their time is yet to come. And I have a feeling it's going to be a their time is yet to come sort of situation, and that they really want to do this sort of color revolution, as it were, here in at the heart of the empire first, before expanding it outward.
Yeah, and I think they're probably also banking on the idea that, as the more that America becomes destabilized, right? The more that's going to have a ripple effect because confidence in America that many countries depend on will be lost. Um, I'm very sure that they feel that they have to do this revolution in order to anticipate the demographic change that is already in progress and will kind of reach a kind of horizon point in the next 20 years where whites will be 50% uh, or a little bit less, and that there has to be a world that in America exists that's already there for them, right? But how unified Americans will be around this, new America is doubtful. Um, in that case, I would say Biden is some kind of a transitional president. So who he chooses as vice president is going to be, of course, we've all hypothesized, very telling. But even her presidency will be again very transitional. Uh, if this was just really about like there's a ferocity behind it, and a caving in that I can't believe it's just simply to get rid of Trump and go back to the Obama years. I don't see that. Maybe they've had to, you know, um, go along with the way things are developing because they too are surprised about how rapidly this happened. The protests have calmed down in Britain and France and Germany, as you say, but there was a kind of solidarity, especially in Britain, that took place, probably because of Brexit. Um, so yes, we'll see how it develops.
Yeah, I think we have only seen the beginning of this, not only here but abroad, and the movement will spread. Now, hopefully, at some point, as the saying goes, the pendulum will swing back. Maybe here at home, maybe abroad. Again, some of those European countries, you would think they're liberal, but they get very touchy when you go after their history. And again, there can be a swell in national pride in European countries just over the smallest of things. Again, look at the way the French still speak about the Anglosphere. Like they'll acquiesce to migrants from Algeria, from wherever, but the minute an Englishman or an American criticizes his country, he will. You would think he's ready to restore the French Empire at that point, and you get these odd interactions in several places, especially in Western Europe. They will become very nationalistic, very prideful of their countries. If there is an external threat from a fellow European country or from a, in general, white country, whether that be anywhere from the Anglosphere, such as America, wherever. But I don't know. You may get a backlash in terms of that. You may get a backlash in more conservative parts of America. And I don't know. I figured if it was going to come already, it would have. But again, things that have been more improbable have happened before, so I'm not counting out that yet. And again, but my point is this is probably going to creep from America into other parts of the world, mainly via I would say economic influence, such as the corporations supporting these things. Uh, Black Lives Matter rally, but also Pride Parade sponsored by Amazon in Munich or wherever. But
Yeah.
at the end of the day, like I said, this is just the beginning, and I'm eager in probably the worst possible way to see where this is going. But I think that's everything for this week. I think that's everything.
Yeah, the only little bit of news I have is in Poland. So they're having their election Monday. We're going to know the results. It's a very tight race, apparently, although the first round did very well at something like 48% of the vote, and there were several uh, candidates. and the runner-up I think only had 28 at the time. So now I think they're just separated by a few points in Duda's favor. His opponent is Chaskovsky. So we'll see how it goes. Uh, an interesting little tidbit is, of course, Tchaikovsky is the pro-EU liberal candidate from Warsaw. If you look at his rallies, you're going to see Polish and EU flags. I always found that funny, and but he has changed his position in order to siphon off some of the vote. Uh, and that is that he is now against same-sex adoption. Uh, I mean, we know the motive. He wants to win. He's probably going to renege on that. It's there for fence sitters who would vote for Duda but have been unhappy with uh, with some of the tax issues involving Poland and his party. But we'll see. We'll see. I'm hoping that Duda wins.
Yeah, and that will be interesting because it will be another buoy to the right wing because Poland seems to be a country a lot of right wingers in the Anglosphere, a lot of right wingers in Western Europe look to as an example. Even though, again, personally, I think Hungary's probably a better example to look to. But again, I do think even if it's a foreign election in a country that really isn't that big, really doesn't pull that much weight on the world stage, it still may be a morale boost for the global right wing at large. So, yeah, definitely look forward to that. And again, I saw that the poll was 50.1% for the liberal candidate and
Oh, really?
49.9 for Duda. That's the most recent
Oh,
polling I
wow.
saw. It was
Okay.
a
I saw an
sample of
old one.
500 people from a few days ago, but it's a neck and neck election. So we'll probably have more news on that next week. That will probably be a big focus of next week's episode. But I think that's all. I think that's all.
Yeah.
So we'll see you all next time, and goodbye.
Take care.